This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
Welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen. Today, we are very happy to be joined by Erik of the Reconsider Podcast. And today, we're going to take a deep dive into the movie Blade Runner 2049. And if you listen to last week's episode, we talked about Blade Runner from 1982. So these are two great episodes to listen to back to back. So I highly suggest you go back and listen to that episode, but it's not required, obviously. Not so much because you need that as background knowledge for this movie or episode. It's just because it was a great show. So thank you so much, Erik, for being on today.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love your show and I love this movie and I love talking about it.
Great, thank you. So Reconsider is a podcast about politics and news, but it's really much more than just the news of the day sort of thing that you can get on TV or radio. Zander and Erik, which I'm sad to say Zander wasn't able to join us today, but they help you contextualize current politics and history and the broader forces and in political theory. Reconsider helps you rise above the one-liners, the 140-character politics, and the tribal narratives. Their motto is, we don't do the thinking for you, and they really don't. And that's why I think it's such an amazing podcast. Do you have anything you could add to that, Erik?
No, thanks, man. I think one of the things that I really like about Reconsider is that Zander and I don't always agree on everything, and we do a great job, I think, showcasing how to discuss stuff in a way that in a way in which we're really learning. And one of these days I want to do a behind the scenes episode where we actually, because we build these episodes out with a lot of disagreement and then we do a bunch of research and learn some stuff as we go. So I kind of want to do one of these blind to show a little more of how we do that. But that's my favorite part is whenever we disagree, and it's a good time.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'd love to listen to an episode like that. Now, this movie, Blade Runner 2049, is currently in the theaters if you're listening to this show in the 2017-2018 time period. It stars Ryan Gosling as Kay, Harrison Ford reprising his role as Deckard. There's Robin Wright Penn and a bunch of other great actors. It was released in October of 2017. We will definitely have a few spoilers in this episode. But I think this is a good way to help you understand the movie and maybe get a little different perspective when you're watching it your second, fourth, or fifth time. And this film takes place about 30 years in the future after the original Blade Runner movie. And it's all of these Blade Runner from 1982 and then this newest Blade Runner are all based on the 1968 Philip K. Dick novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was a great novel too. Two great movies based on a great novel.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I like about the second movie is it brought in a lot of the elements of Dick's novel that were missing in the original. In particular, a lot of details about society and the environment that we'll get into. So it brings back some stuff that I thought, that just really flesh out the mastery of the novel in movie form.
Now, Erik, you're quite an aficionado of Blade Runner, especially that first movie. Can you just explain a bit where your interest in Blade Runner came from, and then maybe briefly set up how that 1982 movie leads into the Blade Runner 2049?
Yeah, definitely. So the original Blade Runner is my favorite movie, pretty much hands down. And what I love about it, and I was really excited to be able to talk about it with you on your show a number of episodes back. And so, guys, if you haven't listened to that, I encourage you to go listen to it because we really get into the thick of it, is that Blade Runner is a sci-fi movie that manages to do an incredibly good job being true to the thematic and philosophical questioning that makes science fiction such a powerful and important literary genre in the world. A lot of sci-fi that gets translated into movies, in order to be available for a wider audience, sets aside a lot of those questions in order to have more action, more sex, more whatever. But these guys really spend a lot of time and really respect the audience and force them to think. So the first time I watched Blade Runner, I came out thinking, what the heck happened? And so I read some more and I thought about it and I watched it again and again and again. And every time I got something more out of it. And it always leaves you with really good questions whenever you watch it that are hard to answer. So like our show, it doesn't do the thinking for you. And I really like that. And so, of course, I had to see 2049 as soon as it came out. I went out, the night that it opened. And what's interesting about 2049 is it's set so far in the future that a lot has happened. A lot has changed in the world between these two movies. And there are 3 shorts that were released between the movies as part of the promo that do a little bit of explaining of some of the events that occurred pre-movie, like how the big power outage happened and how all the data in the world basically was lost, how the replicant program got shut down and then restarted after Tyrell died, stuff like that. And so if you're not familiar with those, 2049 is going to be a bit of a shock, which is okay. It works just fine, but I encourage you to go watch those shorts as well.
Yeah, I didn't see those shorts. Now I'm definitely going to go back and watch them. That very first scene, the opening scene of LA, we see a very different LA than we did in the original Blade Runner. Maybe we can get our setting a little bit, and then before we move on.
Definitely. I was really happy with how they did this because, of course, I'm walking into this sequel knowing that Blade Runner is my favorite movie, terrified, right? There's lots of hype. Blade Runner had a cult following and I'm part of it. And I had a lot of anxiety that, okay, they're trying to do a big box office smash. And is it going to blow its connection to its predecessor? Is it going to, have the same kind of respect for the genre that Blade Runner did? And at that opening moment, we see Kay flying through. I knew it was going to be great. So in the original Blade Runner, of course, it's nearly all black. It's dark and destructive. It's an industrial wasteland. And you have these flares rising up in the background as you have Deckard flying through. And in 2049, they show that they're going to be taking a bit of a different spin on this because the world has changed. So instead of black, we have a ton of gray. And you have just gobs and gobs of this endless grid of high density housing that really sets the mood. There are these endless people, really nothing in the city, rather than a series of concrete blocks. It's almost like an ant farm kind of thing, except that people don't look very busy. They look pretty idle. So they're just jammed in there. They're just clinging on to survive. There's no luxuries of any sort. And the other notable thing is that since it's gray instead of black and you don't see those flares, it tells you already that, okay, we've changed something. We're no longer outputting a bunch of hydrocarbons. We're no longer an industrial wasteland. We're now more environmentally stable. And the population hasn't plummeted the way that it had in the original Blade Runner, where there were a lot of empty buildings. But instead, we've got this population surging back, but no prosperity, no lively. The city's not alive, even though there are a lot of people living there.
Some of the themes have carried over, though, and in the very next scene, that they show somebody who's a bug farmer in just a complete wasteland, and we find out that that's actually one of the replicants that Kay is sent out to kill. Let's maybe just quickly talk about what were your impressions of Kay, because he's a very different character than Deckard was in the 1982 movie.
Yeah, so one of the tough things about doing this movie is like, okay, so you've got another Blade Runner who's your lead character. I mean, there's a lot of parallels here. And, just as the first scene showed us that there's some departure we're going to have from the original movie, that we're going to be doing something different, we see the same thing here with Kay. And, Deckard, of course, in the original is recruited against his will. He has his arms seriously twisted into doing the job. Whereas Kay is very happy about his job, or at least he's content, right? He's going around, he's doing his thing, and he has absolutely no question in his mind that he's doing the thing that he's supposed to do. And no sympathy at all for Bautista's character, who's this like gritty old dude, clearly lonely, and just trying to live this humble life. Kay asks him, "What are you?" Asking him if he's a replicant or not, and he says, "I'm a farmer." And so you sit there, you go like, "Oh, this guy's not doing anything wrong," but oh no, Kay's got to kill him, and Kay takes care of him, and they get in a fight. Kay wins, despite Bautista's massive size, because Kay is very well designed, and forces Bautista down, takes the eye reading, and then after another fight finishes him off. And you see a coldness there that not even Deckard had at the beginning. Deckard was still this very emotional person. He showed fear, he showed anger, Deckard showed a lot of fear and a lot of emotion every time he had to kill someone, but Kay didn't seem to care at all.
Then we should probably, this theme of the tree comes up again and again throughout the movie. So what did you think of the tree metaphor?
Oh, the tree is great. So, what we see is that there is one bloody tree in the entire movie, and it is dead. And this dead tree is being held up by wire. And the plot later reveals that like a carving was taken from the tree, and it was real wood, and that's really rare. So this real wood carving is very, very valuable because you can't get trees anywhere anymore. And we also find that Kay finds out due to a hunch that the tree is on top of a coffin. So there's a coffin buried underneath it. So, the tree obviously to a large extent represents nature as a whole for us and shows us that it's been destroyed. But the tree also the fact that Bautista's character is holding on to this tree as hard as he can shows that he has this reverence for the past, a reverence for life. It stands as a bleak memorial that life once grew here. And this stands in, contrast obviously to the dark world around him, but also the Los Angeles that was built by technology up from the ashes. And I love the tree so much that I'm thinking of making a bonsai diorama of it, because I do bonsai at home, and making a dead bonsai plant is an advanced thing that someday I will try. But I think the fact that Bautista is holding on to this tree, this dead symbol of life, shows that he's such a human character that that it reinforces the idea from the original movie that the old replicants are way more human than the other humans that we saw in the original movie, and obviously way more human than Kay, who, like Deckard in the original movie, is the uncaring monster, right? The destroyer of life rather than the keeper of life.
Let's talk a little bit more about Kay. When he goes back to the police station, he talks with his boss, played by Robin Wright Penn, and we see that they talk about being alive, and they also bring in the person who now runs the Tyrell Corporation, Neander Wallace. How does that all fit in, especially that really key scene where we see how replicants are made?
Oh man, just this movie, while it is slow and plotting in a lot of ways like the original, it just throws these huge symbolic sledgehammers at you over and over, and I really like that. So Kay's boss. So one interesting thing about both Kay's boss and Wallace is they're human, and we never see them outside of their place of employ. So Kay's boss is in the LAPD tower, and we only ever see her in her office, no matter what the time of day is. And Wallace literally lives in a pyramid. Now it's the old Tyrell pyramid, but he stays in that, and he's clearly a pharaoh type, right? He's a god on earth, and we'll get back to him in a sec. What Kay and his captain talk about at some point is the fact that Kay is not alive. Kay believes, he sort of knows that since he was made rather than born, he doesn't have a soul. And so that means he's a machine and not really alive. And we'll get into Kay's relationship later, but like Kay has a relationship, right? He is in love. And so what we what we see for him is that he's sitting there with feelings and with thoughts and emotions, but under the belief that I'm not alive, I am a machine. And we'll see later that his belief as to whether he is alive or not deeply influences his behavior. And so whether you were made or born, you could, have a debate over whether that means, am I alive? Am I not alive? And you could even say it doesn't matter whether you were made or born, right? Like what you do or how you act determines how you're alive. It forces you to ask this question. But in the movie, it's really important. And, how are they made? Well, immediately after that, we see Wallace's opening scene that replicants are sort of popped out of this plastic bag when they're born in this really inhumane way. They just like drop onto a floor. It's almost like needlessly cruel. And, so they don't come from a womb. And Wallace is there to witness the birth of his, newest version of a replicant that he's trying to get to bear children, because while Wallace has saved humanity from total disaster and famine through his technology before, and he's helped mankind colonize a bunch of new planets, and he clearly thinks that mankind has to keep colonizing to survive. He's looking for this, he's looking for a way for replicants to replicate themselves so that they can grow it at a sufficient rate, because he can't make enough of them. But so this replicant is born by dropping onto the floor, and Wallace searches her to see whether she has the capacity to give birth. She doesn't, and so he just kills her. And this kind of reinforces this whole pharaoh god thing, where he's got this army of slaves that are building society around him, and that's all they are to him. They are to him, they are clearly not alive. They're clearly just machines. He's going to treat them that way. And not in his mind, not only is he alive, but he's, sort of a man above everything else and everyone else. He is God, and, these slaves are his children, and Earth's people are also his children.
It's interesting where we talk about how the Kay's humanity, and we find a scene where Kay is in his apartment, which basically looks essentially the same as Deckard's apartment.
Oh, yeah.
And we find the character who's probably the most human of all the characters is a projection, a computer projection. Can we talk a little bit about his Kay's relationship with Joy, who is it's almost to me like a step back in technology, but she's also has more humanity built into her than Kay does.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Joy is absolutely my favorite character, and Kay's relationship with Joy is my favorite part for a lot of reasons. So yeah, Joy is just a 3D holograph with speakers built into the apartment. So presumably, the Joy models are built for people who can't afford full replicants, because as Wallace is making clear, he couldn't even build enough of them for to colonize the outer planets. They're clearly really expensive. All the sales conversation you hear is with a high level client. So there are these pleasure models, but Joy is affordable, but Joy is also able to exhibit the full range of human emotions, because of course the Nexus 6 replicants, which were the models in the original 1982 movie, were given limited emotional capacities, but that was still too much. They rebelled. So these new replicants have almost zero emotional capacity, and they're reprogrammed repeatedly to keep their emotional capacity to a minimum. Whereas Joy is able to, because she's just a projection, she can't hurt anything. They're able to put the full emotional package into her. And so Joy is, at first we see Joy as almost comical. She's doting. She dresses up in a 1950s type outfit to serve Kay fake dinner so that he can see what looks like good food as he eats what's probably bug paste and barley. The the scene where she's introduced is great because you just hear her at first, and he pours 2 glasses of alcohol for himself and her, but then he clinks them himself and drinks them. And you're like, oh, what's going on? And then you see the projection come, and you realize, like, holy smokes, like, Kay, this seemingly inhuman, unemotional character who, even when he's with her, is very stoic, has still decided to invest in a joy model for himself so that he can simulate this relationship. But as you see going through the movie, the question of, is Joy alive enough to be capable of truly loving him, creeps up more and more. So you see her become more and more human. You see her do things that seem more and more like compassionate and caring. When Kay gets knocked out, when his car is shot out of the sky, she like freaks out. She really, really is worried that, he's knocked out. He can't hear her, but she's genuinely worried that he's hurt. And so she clearly acts as if she really does love him and care about him. And if she does, what does that mean? Is she alive? And for us, what is love? But these biological reflexes that we have as well, right? Are we programmed to love by our nature? Are we just biological machines that love because we're designed to be capable of it? And is that any different from a digital machine that's programmed to be able to truly love someone like Kay? So I think, you get to ask the question, is our love any more real than hers? And are we, in the end, any more human than she is? Which is like a whole, a step beyond what we had in the original Blade Runner, right? We had these 4 replicants running around, and we ask, are we more human than they are? But they bleed. They bleed and they die, and they can, and Joy can't. Joy is just a bunch of ones and zeros, but they make a compelling case that she is just as human as we are.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. Yeah, I thought that was what was so great about this movie. The 1982 version, it's so much trying to figure out who's human and who's not human, where this one, they really blended it all together, where you stop thinking about what are the characteristics, that you're thinking on a different level of what makes someone human, where this projection, the scene where he finds presumably a prostitute human to project her on Joy onto, and it's like dehumanizing the human with somebody who's more human acting than the human is.
Yeah. I think this was one of the reasons I think this was the most brilliant part of the movie is that the core theme of Blade Runner is, what does it mean to be human? Both from a biological standpoint, but also an emotional standpoint. What is humanity? What does it mean to act with humanity? And it explored that question really, really well. And you go, well, what can you do next and stay in the same theme? How can you possibly make someone ask a new question around this in a compelling way? And introducing Joy as a totally non-biological person, and forcing you to ask whether she is human, whether she has humanity, really, really steps up the game, because it forces you to put aside the whole question of soul and free will and stuff. Like, she is programmed, but are we any less programmed? And that's a really cool, tough question to walk away with.
I thought the next part of the movie, where it moved out of LA and into San Diego, where San Diego was basically the garbage dump of Los Angeles. And why did Kay go to San Diego?
Yeah, Kay is trying to find who he thinks is his father. And so Kay has a memory of having found this, or of having hidden away this wood carving of a horse, and obviously horses are a thing in both movies. He has a memory of this, and he finds out that the memory is real. And so he's like, oh my God, if this memory is real and I find this horse, it means that my memories are real, and that I, didn't, that these weren't just designed memories and put in me, and therefore I might be real. And the reason he's asking this is because he is investigating for the LAPD. He's investigating, trying to find the replicant who was born of a real mother, right? So obviously very messianic there, which is another thing brought back from the original movie. Roy Batty was our Messiah, was our dark Messiah figure. We have another Messiah figure that Kay is hunting, but he starts to suspect that it might be him. So he goes to San Francisco to walk through the same facility where he had hidden the horse, and succeeds in doing so. Just to double check with you, Steve, did I get that right? Or is he looking for, because he then goes to talk to the guy to get some paperwork, to get the guy that owns the kids.
Yeah. And that was a part, he couldn't readily get that because of the blackout.
Right.
And
yes.
so that's why he had to physically go into books to find it.
Yeah. So he's, but was the horse in San Diego, or was it just the book that was in San Diego?
The horse was in San Diego.
Okay.
He went back and he found that horse in a furnace.
Yeah.
And that was all those memories were getting triggered along the way. There was a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. And then, so the other reason, so once he finds the horse, he wants to go find some more information that could be relevant to this kid. And so there's a nearby, he has a memory of being an orphan and kind of, working at this terrible place. So he goes to the owner of this terrible place nearby where he found the horse, to get records of the kids that were there. So this guy owns a sweatshop of children taking apart electronic components to probably recycle the precious metals, because San Diego is now literally just a trash heap for LA. And he beats the guy up a little bit, and then they find this book. But the part of the book that covers the time period that this messianic child would have been there is literally torn out. And, so Kay is no, and doesn't know what to do next. But the coolest thing for me about San Diego is that it was another great world builder. San Diego is now literally a trash dump. You see the result of global warming. You see ships that have washed up onto the land, possibly due to flooding, and then probably also the result of nuclear winter, because the water receded and now all that's left is sand, or some sort of environmental stabilization. And you have these ships flying over that are just dumping trash onto this area. And, while there is technology that's able to keep people alive, you still have these marginalized people on the edge of this gritty society that, hundreds of children that have no parents, that have nobody that cares for them, working as slaves for this angry guy that feeds them. So it gives you just another really cool world building aspect.
That we all, in that whole scene, in that whole section, we see that Kay is moving towards this humanity, and that's screwing up with his programming. When he goes back to LA to the police headquarters, he has to do something called baselining. What was that baselining, and what do you think the purpose of that was?
Yeah. And so this is another thing I really like, because the Villenueve, the director, respects the audience in the same way that the original Blade Runner respected the audience. It doesn't give you answers. It gives you stuff to think about. And so baselining, he's in this room. He's facing some sort of recording device. So it looks a lot like the Voight-Kampff test that's designed to test whether you are a replicant. It's just as inhuman as the Voight-Kampff, or inhumane as the Voight-Kampff test. There's no connection, and there's stuff looking into your eyes. So all those themes are there. But instead of testing whether you are a replicant by asking questions, what it's doing is forcing you to. What it will do is it will have phrases that will end with some sort of very human term, especially about relationships. So stuff like connection and loneliness. And what happens is that the baseline test, Kay is looking at the device, and some guy that you don't see is in these speakers reading phrases that are either poetic or emotionally triggering. And causing, and then when Kay responds, what it does is it like looks at his, probably his heart rate and his nervous responses and stuff like that, basically to see whether he is becoming emotional. And again, it doesn't tell you any of that. You can infer it, and someone could probably disagree with my assessment here. But what happens is after he finds the horse and starts to believe that he might have been born, that he might therefore be alive, his emotional response to this second baseline is way off. So at the end, they say, your baseline is way off. And I'm pretty sure in the very next scene, his boss, who really likes him despite the fact that he's not alive, she says, you're doing a pretty good job. You don't need a soul. You're doing a pretty good job without it. She clearly likes him and the work he does. And so she gives him the chance to like take a break. Because I'm pretty sure that if she didn't give him a chance to like cool down, take a break and re-baseline again, that they've probably have just liquidated him because he's a dangerous machine. He's a replicant that's starting to emote again. And those are unpredictable. They do bad stuff. So that's what I think was going on. They were just checking to see whether he was developing emotions. He was, and he escaped liquidation because his boss happened to like him.
He's getting all of these memories, and that's probably one of the things that's really screwing him up in baselining. And he goes to see Anna, who is somebody who makes memories. And that was really like her building that she was in. It's another one of these really stark settings and scenes that they had in the movie. Tell us a little bit more about Anna.
Yeah, so Anna is sick, so sick that she can't go outside. And so she's in this dome all of her life. And what she has is this ability to essentially use very advanced VR tooling to create vivid memories. And she's really, really good at it. We get introduced to Anna as she's making a memory of like a bug in a very lush jungle. And we don't know she's doing it at first. So we see some green for the first time. And then we realize that it's fake. And she's, despite living alone, she's this very happy person somehow. Don't know how, but he goes to her to like make sure that to check whether his memory is real or not. And she's able to determine that it's real somehow, because like just her instinct for real versus fake memories is really, really good. And what happens, what this shows us is that, Kay believes that having real memories is what would make him human, right? And that, or at least alive. And that makes sense because if he's a replicant, they've inserted memories into him that are fake, that are designed. And if he was born, those memories would have been real because he would have actually grown up. And I think it shows, this scene and this theme shows how much people cling to their past as part of their identity rather than the present moment, right? Kay thinks his past determines his present. And it is his belief that is true that makes his present different. So when he is trapped by his past so much that for him, what action he takes going forward depends on whether his past is real or created. And it's only much later that he realizes that when he begins to think, spoiler alert, he begins to think that he is the messianic child. He later learns out he's not. And he has this crisis because he's like, oh, I'm not the messianic child. My past isn't real. Maybe that should change what I do. But his experiences throughout the movie convince him otherwise, convince him that he is in fact free of his past, that he can choose what to do with his present moment, even without his past having been real, even without him having been born in a conventional way. And that change for him is the pivotal moment for the movie. And it's something that I think we can all learn from, right? That we aren't slaves to our past.
Yeah, that determinism versus his own free will, it keeps playing off of each other so well during the whole movie, and that's really his struggle the whole movie.
Yeah, and it's a struggle for us as well. It's an emotional roller coaster for us, right? When we start to believe that he's the messianic child, Well, he has an emotional moment. Like when he finds out that memory is real, he freaks out because he doesn't want to be the Messianic child at first, even though he is, because it means that he's now being hunted. It means that he's like wrong. He eventually embraces it and starts determining his own future based on this idea of how he was born. And then when we later find out that he's not the Messianic child, we feel crushed. We're like, oh no, you're just a machine. You're not a real person. You're not special. And so we go through this up and down with him. And I really enjoyed how the movie did that.
Kay eventually figures out that he has to go to Las Vegas. Explain what the whole Las Vegas is. Was this something that maybe they explained a little bit in those 3 shorts? It was like Las Vegas, but it was also very different.
The thing about Vegas that is different is a largely artistic choice to show it as even grander and more opulent than it was before. And what we see in Vegas is, again, it's red. And this is just such a cool hot cut in the movie where we see Kay in this gray and he knows he's going to go to Vegas, and then boom, the whole screen is red. Everything is just a hue of red, and Kay is walking through the desert there. And what you see is a whole bunch of monuments that look like they're from a mythical ancient Egypt. So we're back in the land of the pharaohs, and so Vegas matches a lot of the symbolism of the rest of the movie. And so when we're thinking about the pharaoh symbol for Wallace, what we're thinking about is, the slavery of many to, fuel the opulence and survival of a few. And Vegas being the, primary symbol of opulence in the United States, it's a really great place to move to, because of course, even before the probably nuclear desolation, the replicants were the slaves of society and building it up. And Wallace makes it very, very clear that all human progress was built on like the blood and the backs of those at the bottom. And so I like the idea of linking this symbol of human opulence to the slavery that fueled it and built it.
Then we get also into a little bit more with Joy. In order for Kay to take her, he has to basically take all of her programming and put it onto like a flash drive. But if that flash drive's destroyed, she dies. Oh,
God, yeah. And he's not sure he's willing to do that, but she really, really wants to come with him when he takes this trip. And also, she knows that he's being hunted, and that if Wallace or the LAPD get to the apartment and she's there, she'll they'll be able to extract information about where Kay is and be able to find him. So to protect him, she endangers herself. So they get rid of the hard backup that's in the house and move her completely to the flash drive version that Kay is able to carry with him. So he takes her out there and she's being a pretty cool companion. But of course, we run into Love. And Love seemed like she was going to be a really complex character. She's probably my only disappointment of the movie, because we see her cry when Wallace kills the potential birthing replicant. So I thought she was going to be more complex, but her only real motivation is to be the best. And she hates Kay because Kay isn't following the rules and is possibly better than her, and sort of isn't doing what she wants. And so when Kay is in Vegas, obviously he finds Deckard, and they have some cool scenes together, but she makes a dramatic entrance and gets in a fight with Kay, beats him up, and Joy's flash drive goes flying out of Kay's pocket. And right before she takes Deckard away, and they want Deckard because they know that he's the father of the chosen one, or of the Messianic child, and want to get information out of him. But before she does that, she takes the time to go back and like puts her foot up and smashes Joy. And before that, she says, like, we hope you've enjoyed our product. So she reminds Kay that his relationship, the woman he fell in love with, is just a product. And just before the foot comes down, Joy decides that the last thing she has to say is to tell Kay that she loves him. And when she died, like, her dying is definitely the most heartbreaking moment of the entire movie. Because his program was destroyed, but because you've really learned to love that you've really come to believe that she's human. But then when he goes back to Los Angeles, like defeated and broken, there's this great scene where like his face is all cut up and his nose has been broken and he's sad and he passes by a giant advertisement for Joy. And so this like really kind of like very exotic looking version of Joy that's played by the same actress, so she looks very similar, like comes down and points at him and is like, you look lonely. And you realize that this like baseline Joy, like he has to deal with the fact that this woman that he loved is a product. And he's like reminded through this advertisement that she's a program like designed to make him feel good, right? Designed to make him feel joy. And so he now has to question like whether the woman he lost that he loved so much even was real in the first place. Ugh.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. Yeah, it just keeps going back and forth between humanizing and dehumanizing. Like this Joy projection, 3D projection is like 50 feet tall. And and he's, minuscule compared to her. So, it just like amplifies the fakeness of it and what he lost through the Joy who has maybe become more human than anybody in the movie.
That's the really brilliant part about, well, I keep saying the brilliant part. One of the brilliant parts about this movie is that in the original Blade Runner, you have a slow progression from the replicant seeming very inhuman to seeing human to seeming greater than human, because you have this like messianic Ubermensch figure in Roy Batty. Like he is beyond human and better than human. And you realize that as Deckard realizes that over time, where in this movie, every time you think you figured it out, right? When Kay thinks he's alive and it's important that he was born conventionally, and then he finds out he's not. When you finally decide for sure that like you feel it when she dies and you've decided she's real and she's really important and my God, I could fall in love with her too, kind of thing. Then you're reminded again that she's just a program. And so it never lets you truly resolve that question in your mind. Every time you think you figured it out, it throws something at you that makes you think, maybe not. I don't know. And so it's worth a rewatch just to like go through those roller coasters repeatedly, knowing what you're experiencing.
One of the last scenes is back in the pyramid in this kind of creepy room that Wallace hangs out in. And Wallace is trying to convince Deckard to come along, and he even uses a replicant who looks exactly like Rachel from the 1982 movie. So she looks exactly like Rachel, and you can tell it's really playing on Deckard's heartstrings. What was the purpose of that scene, and what comes out of that?
Every single scene in this is part of a theme, and we're I hate to say it, but like we're only going to scrape the surface of this iceberg where, hopefully for you as the viewer, we're going to give you a few things that you can think about next time. But, every single time the scenes change, you need to be ready to ask the question, what are they having me think about here? Because the scenes move the plot forward, yes, but they also force you to ask some questions. And with this one, what Wallace openly wonders is whether Deckard was destined to fall in love with Rachel and create the first, conventionally born replicant, this messianic child type thing. And, so he's actually getting Deckard to ask whether he's a replicant. And my God, once again, the question is never fully answered. Now, I'm part of the, yes, Deckard's obviously a replicant camp, but hey, Ridley Scott's not. So, Ridley Scott is, but Harrison Ford's not. So, you're allowed to not know either way. But they force, by introducing Rachel and seeing his heartstrings get pulled, Deckard has to ask the question of himself whether his feelings for her, much like Kay's feelings for Joy or Joy's feelings for Kay, are merely the result of a predeterministic process, or whether he has free will to choose, right? Because it isn't Rachel. It is a copy of Rachel. And is he able to make the choice to not go to a copy of Rachel in order to, not be bloody, lonely, and miserable anymore? And he does decide to walk away. Now that makes you go, free will is one. But then, of course, he says that they got the eye color wrong for Rachel as he walks away. And then Love just offs Rachel unceremoniously with a gunshot to the head. And so Deckard has walked away, but he does make it clear that Wallace has failed to truly replicate Rachel. And so we're not even certain if free will has won, or if Wallace simply failed to set up the moment of destiny that he meant to. So he then decides, well, I gave it a good shot. Now I'm going to take you off world and torture you.
There's a little bit of a fight scene, and then they wind up Kay and Deckard going back to Anna's dome that she lives in, and that's a pretty powerful scene at the end.
Yeah. The fight scene was pretty good, but I think it's actually worth passing over, because it sits so far on the side of the, this movie had to play a balance because it wanted to be a big blockbuster, even though it wasn't. So it had to have some cool fight scenes and a lot of tension and such. And so it was much more about the plot and the action than the symbolism. But when that's done, Kay has taken a number of gunshot wounds. Knife wounds. He is in serious trouble. And I think he knows he's going to die. And so knowing that he's going to die, he's at the end of his journey, right? He has gone through the roller coaster of, moving from treating Joy as an accessory to having truly fallen in love with her and then lost her and then been reminded that she's fake. He's gone through the roller coaster of hunting the messianic child and not caring and then thinking it's him and then really caring and then finding out it's not him and then not being sure if he cares, but then really caring anyway because he has that talk with the one-eyed lady about, he can still have free choice even if he is not the messianic child, even if he wasn't conventionally born, and he believes it now. And he's gone through this roller coaster and he's finally achieved peace and in a way that he didn't have back when he was just a machine. And he decides that his final work is just to make sure that he can reunite Deckard with his daughter, Anna, who is the messianic child. This whole time, she has been in that dome in order to keep her safe, probably not even sick, just kept away so that she wasn't used and wasn't hurt. And I think he's able to have so much empathy for both of them because he has been in love with someone that he couldn't even touch. He thought he had a father and chased around looking for him and felt the longing to have that connection for real. And so he's able to be satisfied reuniting Deckard and Anna, because Deckard didn't even know where Anna was in order to keep her safe. So he hadn't seen her since she was taken away, since Rachel died. Deckard's just been alone with his hound dog and whiskey in Vegas. And as Kay lies down, the same death music that Roy Batty had in the original plays, and this is the only song that is the same between the two movies, and it's a super obvious parallel. But in this one, Kay isn't this Ubermensch villain. He's of course, and he's not the sort of antagonist in the movie. He's the hero. He's the Blade Runner. And he has taken on a completely different role than either Roy or Deckard did. right? And through the end, unlike either of them, he decides he was perfectly comfortable with his role and that he'd lived a life worth living.
It's just such a great movie. What were some of your final takeaways from the movie?
Oof. I think the big themes, of course, are agency versus determinism, and also like humanity and what does it mean to be human. I think it explores them even better than the original did. And I think the original was necessary. You couldn't just jump to this. The original set Villenueve up to really make a masterpiece, to expand on some of these questions that, in 1982 were sort of being introduced for the first time to popular culture. So yeah, my big takeaway is I think that, boy, Villenueve had such a tall order trying to make a sequel to Blade Runner that wasn't just the same thing again, or wasn't, kind of a disgrace to the legacy of Blade Runner. Blade Runner did such an innovative job asking these questions, and Villeneuve really takes it to the next level. I was really pleased. There are, of course, some plot issues that I'm willing to forgive, that I don't care about, because this movie really makes you think and feel the kind of stuff that I think is really important to be thinking and feeling, to think about, how much agency we have and how much our past and our ideas of who we think we are, ideas of what we think our role should be, affect our ability to take meaningful action with full agency in the present moment and to become our best selves, become who we want to be.
Do you think that they should follow up with another movie, or maybe sit on it until 2052 and see how things develop? Do you think this is a movie that they should maybe explore some more of those side alleys that they brought up?
I want to say yes, in part because I just want another Blade Runner movie. But I do think that, there is a lot of stuff that's left hanging, right? Anna is there. So there's plot opportunity for it, right? Deckard and Anna have been reunited. Wallace is still around. He can make another love, and he still has this, vision for what humanity can be. And also, of course, there's the revolution. There's like the replicant revolution that is like brewing quietly. So that was clearly set up for a sequel. So plot wise, it could happen. I think a couple of the questions about, I think that Wallace, for example, could be much more developed. He was a little bit one dimensional, but his like vision and his like ruthlessness after it is really interesting. And I think we could sympathize with him a lot more as a character in another movie. And I think that there are more questions to ask about, about what is it? I think one of the big questions that kind of gets opened but not really explored is what is morally acceptable in the rebuilding of human civilization from destruction, right? Because like Wallace has started to rebuild it on the backs of slaves, and would it have been more morally correct to not rebuild society and to, not build the replicants or let them be free? And I want to learn more about like sort of the off-world colonies and what society could look like out there as well. There's plenty of space for it. So I think an enterprising director could do something with this.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast. Of course, a big thanks goes out today to our guest, Erik of the Reconsider Podcast. Links to learn more about Reconsider can be found at reconsidermedia.com/podcast or in the show notes. I would also love for you to send in your ratings and reviews on iTunes. 5-star ratings are great, and your feedback really helps me so much. Links to iTunes, social media, and more can be found at a2zhistorypage.com. If you have ideas for show topics, movies, or just like to chat, you can always send me an email to steve@a2zhistorypage.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time beyond the big screen.